Hello, everyone. Good day. With due respect to the chairperson of the Bachelor of Elementary Education, Ms. Richili Alugar, to the lead extensionist of this extension project, we have Ms. Ivy Tiran, and to our research coordinator in the College of Education, Dr. Arlene Pagaura, and to our participants in this extension project, good morning. Allow me to share something about the topic that was given to me. It's on the qualitative research. So it's more on knowing the fundamentals. By the way, I'm Darren, a faculty in the College of Education of Bukidnon State University. So our aim for today is to know the basics of qualitative research, especially on its designs and its data collection methods. So allow me to share a little about the features of qualitative research. The qualitative research deals with meaning of people's lives, really in the real conditions, not in an experimental condition like we have with a quantitative one. Qualitative research also deals with views and perspectives of the participants, and also with emerging concepts that explain human social behavior, as well as it deals with multiple sources of evidences. There are some competencies that we need to have before doing qualitative research. The first is we need to have the listening skill. We need to know how to listen, because usually in qualitative research, it's more on listening to the voices of our participants, on their experiences and on their stories. Second is we need to know how to ask good questions, because with that skill, we can get rich data sets. Third, we need to know more about our study, because with that, we can have sound and correct methodologies and also questions. The fourth one is on caring about the data. It's more on making sure that our data is secured and there is privacy on it, as well as make sure that the data that we gather is really based from the honest answers of our participants. Fifth is do multiple tasks, because when we do qualitative research, we could be the interpreter, we could also be the transcriber, we could also be the encoder, we could also be the recorder, and a lot more. And the last but not the least is on perseverance. We need to be patient, in doing things. We need to persevere so that we can finish it, because doing qualitative research requires more time and effort because we deal with words. Aside from that, here are some research questions that we usually encounter in qualitative research. Usually we are into hows and whats. And then if you look at the purpose, it's more on attempting to discover, generate, explore, identify, and describe. And it usually asks what happened and what was the meaning to people of what happened and what happened over time. It's more on building the description of our phenomenon. So I have here some qualitative research designs that we need to know. But I would like to ask, are we still okay? It's good to note that you're still listening. So let me start. I'll be sharing 5 qualitative research designs. And with it, we will be knowing details about them. In those qualitative research designs, we will go deeper with some nitty-gritty details about it so that If ever we have some research problem in mind, we can determine already what research design in the qualitative can we use. So let's start with narrative inquiry. What is narrative inquiry? According to Clandinin and Connelly, it is a study of human experience through narrative materials, which emerge in a social and historical context through a process of interaction. Those narratives can be found in fictional literature, biographies, oral traditions, or even in our interviews. We will be using narrative inquiry when our intention is to understand human experience for a holistic approach through time. Here are some features of narrative inquiry. First, it could be a personal life story, or it's a restoring in a chronological frame, or it could be a narrative portrait or a poetic one. So it could be illustrations, it could be poems, it could be through storytelling, or it could be through life stories. The data collection methods that we have in narrative inquiry, we can have in-depth interview. So we could have focus group discussion, or we can have an individual interview. And then observation, as well as aesthetic portrayals and documents and artifacts. So these are some of the things that we can look for data. If you want to gather data and we make use of narrative inquiry, we can do this. So I have here an example of a study in using narrative inquiry. So this is a dissertation by Michael Watson in Texas A&M University. So it's entitled Bad Kids Gone Good, a narrative inquiry study of alternative education graduates. The purpose of the study was to explore experiences of two graduates who credit their alternative education as playing a role in their completion of high school in South Texas. The questions are, in what ways do the participants describe their experiences in a traditional education setting prior to enrollment into an alternative education program? In what ways do the participants describe their experiences in alternative education contributing to their graduation? So narrative inquiry was used in the study to gain an in-depth understanding of the unique and individual experiences, the depth, the nuances of graduates of an alternative education system. The narratives were extracted from interviews, written documentations, and conversations collected during the course of study. Further details on the data collection methods are provided in the chapter, and the end product of the study resulted in a narrative that is thick in description, depicting a multidimensional rendering of the participants' perceptions and experiences in alternative education. So looking at this one, the author really made use of a variety of data collection methods. We have here interviews, written documents, and conversations. So here are some of those data that were used to make narratives. So the second qualitative design that we will talk about is the grounded theory. What is a grounded theory? Grounded theory is a qualitative method that enables you to study a particular phenomenon or process and discover new theories that are based on the collection and analysis of the real-world data. So take note, this is data-driven. You get data and make a theory out of it. Unlike traditional hypothesis deductive approaches of research, where you come up with a hypothesis, then try to prove or disprove it, grounded theory is an inductive approach where new theories are derived from the data. So the first thing that you do is collect data, and then the end is to make a theory. So that's grounded theory. The process of data collection, data analysis, and theory development happen in an iterative process. Iterative data collection and analysis occurs until you reach theoretical saturation, the point at which additional data adds no additional insight into the new theory. So there is a need for theoretical saturation here. So it will be iteration. So meaning balik-balik. So you need to go back to the first step or second step or third step so long as you reach the theoretical saturation. When will we use grounded theory? You should consider using grounded theory when there is no existing theory that offers an explanation for a phenomenon that you are studying. It can also be used if there is an existing theory, but it is potentially incomplete as the data used to derive the theory wasn't collected from the group of participants that you plan on researching. So we make use of grounded theory when there's new existing theory, or there is an existing theory, but it's not applicable to your set participants. So here are some steps on doing grounded theory. The first is you determine the initial research questions. Then you recruit and collect data. So you do theoretical sampling. And then you break the transcripts into excerpts. So that's open coding. And you group excerpts into codes. And then you group codes into categories. And then you analyze more excerpts and compare with codes. And then you repeat again the steps 2 to 6 until you reach theoretical saturation. And then you define the central idea, and then you write your grounded theory. So basically, what you do is have the research questions, you collect the data and transcribe the data and look for excerpts on those transcriptions, and then transform them into codes, and then those codes into categories, and then go back again with looking for other data, and then you make it excerpts and so on until you get a central idea, and then you write your theory. It seemed to be tedious, but others can do it. No? Why can't we? Okay. So I have here some example on a grounded theory study. It's a dissertation by Linda Schruch from Walden University. It's entitled Seducing Engagement, a classic grounded theory study of virtual leadership. So I think the phenomenon here is virtual leadership. The author would like to make a theory on virtual leadership. Okay. So the purpose of the study was to discover an explanatory theory derived from data, which facilitates an understanding of virtual leadership, including aspects of systems and processes. Through this study, an exploration of virtual leadership to an emergent pattern, core dimension, or facet that will inform practice and advance the phenomenon of virtual leadership. So in order to derive an explanatory theory based on the gathered data, here are some questions that help the researcher build the theory. The first is, what theory explains the effectiveness of a leader in his or her role within a virtual organization? What key elements of effective leadership, systems, and processes in the virtual organization? What is the role of collaboration, if any, in virtual leadership? What specific interaction issues or systemic conditions influence the virtual leader strategies? How do leaders of virtual organizations perceive the qualities of effective leadership skills for virtual organizations? And what is the role of technology in communication, collaboration, problem solving, decision making, and effective leadership processes within the virtual leadership system? So I think these are some of the questions that was used in the study. In terms of the data collection tools used, it is stated here that the use of interview responses using the interview protocol, and then personal reflection logs and letters, and also organizational documents like minutes of strategic planning meeting, correspondence, internet discussions, mass media communications, and field notes. So there are various data sources that was used in the study. Another type of qualitative research is ethnography. What is ethnography? Ethnography is a type of qualitative research that involves immersing yourself in a particular community or organization to observe their behavior and interactions up close. The word ethnography also refers to the written report of research that the ethnographer produces afterwards. So here, ethnography is more on looking into the behavior or the culture of a certain group. Like usually we do it with tribes and indigenous groups. We do ethnographic research on them. Ethnography is a flexible research method that allows you to gain a deep understanding of a group's shared culture, conventions, and social dynamics. However, it also involves some practical and ethical challenges. So here, there are a lot of ethics to be considered, no? Especially that we already have the NCIP right now, the National Commission of Indigenous People. So they see to it that the indigenous group, the tribes, are not harmed. So that's why we have ethics committees to do that. For example, ethnographic research, sometimes called participant observation, has been used to investigate gangs, so a group. And then football fans, the fanatics, the call center workers, and the police officers. So here, ethnography is more on looking into certain groups, looking into their culture, their conventions, and their social dynamics. In this table, we can see that the goal of ethnography is more on looking into the natives. And it's more on an in-depth understanding of the culture, and it's more on generating rich and detailed social account. The focus of ethnography is culture and values, and the main technique used is participant observation. It's more on living with them for a month, a year, or longer period of time. And it's usually done using field work so that you can observe them holistically. You can have a comparative observation as well as you can look into the context. And then the output of your research usually is an in-depth description of the group's life. So you have their, how do they live? How do the certain group live? So I have here a sample study, ethnographic study. This is a thesis in the Faculty of Education of Massey University. It's entitled An Ethnographic Study of School Culture, Teachers' Job Satisfaction, and Organizational Commitment in Selected New Zealand Secondary School. The thesis describes a study of school culture of public secondary school for girls in a New Zealand provincial city. The main aim of this study was to investigate the relationship between school culture and teachers' job satisfaction and organizational commitment in a New Zealand secondary school. The study sought to identify the elements of school culture which have an effect on teachers' job satisfaction and organizational commitment. In particular, the study also investigated the ways in which these cultural elements affect teachers' job satisfaction and organizational commitment, and the way in which the school culture can be shaped to enhance teachers' job satisfaction and to foster teachers' commitment. So here we can see that an ethnographic study was conducted to describe or to document the school culture of public secondary school for girls in New Zealand. In continuation, the research was an ethnographic case study in which culture of one secondary school was studied using ethnographic research approach. The data collection used mostly is on participant observations in the field as the main research technique. The study also employed both formal and informal informant interviews of people in the school and document analysis as data gathering techniques. The researchers spent a substantial period of time at a selected New Zealand secondary school for a period lasting more than one school year in the field as a participant observer, observing the cultural life of the school as it took a place in participants' daily living, in order to provide a thick description of this cultural life from the perspectives of the participants themselves. So we can see in this study that really it took 1 year, no, for the study, for the researcher to immerse himself on the school so that he could be able to observe what really is it to live or what's the culture of the school. Another type of qualitative design is case study. And I think it was mentioned there that the last example is an ethnographic case study. So let's talk about what case study is all about. Case study is an in-depth examination of a particular case or several cases. So take note, you have a case or cases for a case study. It can be used, for example, to describe in detail a patient's episode of care or explore a professional attitudes and experiences to a new policy initiative or service development. So here are some examples these are some cases that was considered in a case study. The case study method allows investigators to retain holistic and meaningful characteristics of real-life events. So take note, you can look into holistic and meaningful characteristics of events using a case study. And it usually relies on multiple sources of evidence, with data needing to converge in a triangulation. So in a case study, not only one, like not only interview, you could have other ways of getting the data. When to use a case study? Usually we use case study when the questions we are asking are how and why, or when the researcher has a little control of the events or cannot manipulate the behavior of those involved in the study. And when the focus is on contemporary phenomenon within a real-life context. Now, if it's in the real-life context, if the event is in the real-life context. So how to conduct a case study? The first thing that we need to do is to select a broad case of investigation. No, it should be broad. And then after taking a broad case to investigate, we develop our research questions. And then after developing research questions, we then select a specific case or cases. We can have one case or a multiple case study. And then we determine data collection and analysis strategies. After determining the data collection and analysis strategies, we prepare to collect data and make a plan. We collect the data systematically, and then we analyze the data to find the relationship. And then we write the paper. So here is an example of a case study. It's from Pamela R. Dodge of Iowa State University. It's entitled Managing School Behavior, a Qualitative Case Study. The purpose of the dissertation research is to understand the methods by which building-level school administrators collect office discipline referral data and to understand the ways they make decisions based on the data. In order to achieve this objective, here are some of the questions. To what extent do administrators have access to behavior data that inform their decisions on how to improve student success in school and society? To what extent do administrators use behavior data to improve student success in school and in society? And what do administrators perceive it would take to enhance the effectiveness of their current efforts to improve student success in school and society? So these are the questions used in order to look into the case of school administrators. So the case study was used as a strategy of inquiry in which the researcher explores in-depth a program, event, activity, processes, or one or more individuals. So the cases are bound by time and activity, and the researchers collect detailed information using a variety of data collection procedures over the sustained period of time. So in this study, the phenomenon under investigation was the student behavior that negatively impacted learning. So this is the phenomenon. The case for the study were administrators from the pre-K to 12 school district in Midwestern state. So the administrators was the case. And then case study researchers collected detailed information using a variety of data collection procedures. So in the study, there are in-depth interviews and there are reviewed documents. And then the interviews were conducted and audio taped. So the tapes were transcribed into Word documents, and then district documents were reviewed, and the data were coded for emergent themes. Another component for case studies is the unit of analysis, or the focus of the study. So in this study, the unit of analysis was the individual school buildings participating in the study. So in doing the case study, you need to know that the unit of analysis, the case, the phenomenon, and the data collection. Another example of qualitative design is the phenomenology. What is a phenomenology? According to Miriam in 2009, phenomenology is a study of people's conscious experience of their life world. And then, according to Hegel, as cited in Mustakas in 1994, knowledge as it appears to the consciousness, the science of describing what one perceives, senses, and knows in one's immediate awareness and experience. So phenomenology is really being conscious of our experiences. Okay, it's a study of that. So we have two types of phenomenology in this presentation. One is what we call as transcendental phenomenology. Transcendental phenomenology is a scientific study of the appearance of things of phenomena just as we see them and as they appear to us in consciousness. So that's from Mustakas. The aim of transcendental phenomenology is to provide descriptions of an experience as it experiences freshly and purely. Another type of phenomenology is what we call as hermeneutic phenomenology. When the transcendental phenomenology would like to describe the experience, the hermeneutic phenomenology aims to unveil the world of experience of the participants through the researcher's reflection and interpretation. So here, it's more on the researcher reflecting and interpreting the experiences of the participants. So what's the difference between transcendental and hermeneutic phenomenology? So transcendental phenomenology, the researcher seeks to obtain an unbiased description of the raw data. As such, the researcher brackets his or her personal bias. So here, in terms of the analysis, the researcher's interpretation usually is being, the interpretation of the researcher is not much, in transcendental phenomenology, the researcher seeks to obtain an unbiased description of the raw data. As such, the researcher brackets his or her personal bias. So here, it's plainly the researcher is just describing the experiences of the participants. The researcher do not inject his or her interpretation and reflection. But with hermeneutic phenomenology, the researcher's opinions are important as the researcher seeks to interpret the descriptions and to construct meaning. So here in hermeneutic, the researchers are allowed to make interpretation out of the data gathered and to construct meaning. So they make meanings out of those gathered data. So I would like to share an example of a phenomenological interviewing. So because one of the data collection method used in phenomenology is an interviewing, but we call it phenomenological interview. So the phase one in a phenomenological interview is to focus on the past experience with the phenomenon of interest. So participants are asked to reconstruct their early experiences in their families, in school, with friends, in their neighborhood, and also their past experiences in schools and in any such situation. So this is an example. So it's more on reconstructing the past, looking back of the past. So that's the first phase. So your questions will be more on uncovering their past experiences. The second phase is focused on the details of the experience. The purpose is to concentrate on the concrete details of the participants' experience in the phenomenon. Like if you look into teachers, you will be asking, what is it like to be a teacher? So you'll asking like that. And then go on, add more questions, supporting questions to unveil their present experiences. And then the third phase is more on the reflection of meaning. It addresses the intellectual and emotional connections between the participants' work and life. So another example here is, how has being a teacher impacted your life? No? So it's more on getting meaning out of being a teacher. You can also add more questions on that related to that. So I have here an example of a transcendental phenomenological study. It's by Megan Cords of Liberty University for her degree in Doctor of Education. So it's entitled A Transcendental Phenomenological Study of Developmental Math Students' Experiences and Perceptions. So the purpose of her study was to examine the experiences and perceptions of developmental math students who did not meet the university standard of passing a developmental math course. So the study focused on collegiate students enrolled in a developmental math course who struggled to complete a developmental math course and earned a final grade less than 70%. So here are some of the questions used in the study. What was the experience of students who did not pass a developmental math course? What experiences and attitudes impact struggling developmental math students' mastery of basic math skills? What are development math students' perceptions of developmental math course placement in a Euporium model at a four-year institution? How do developmental math students perceive the university's mathematics Euporium model? So these questions may make or break the objective of the study. The researcher made use of transcendental phenomenological approach. It was said to be appropriate because the focus is more on the lived experiences of the students who did not meet the university standard of passing a developmental math course. A phenomenological design allowed her to examine the interactions between measurable outcomes like passing or failing a math course with immeasurable qualities like perceptions and experiences. The data collection methods she used was more on interview, and she did it using Skype, and then those were audio recorded and they were transcribed and then made into themes. So what she made use here is a phenomenological interview. So to summarize everything, to summarize the five qualitative research designs that we consider, let's try to go over with the previous research on transcendental phenomenology. Transcendental phenomenology was said to be appropriate on the research because it talks about the lived experiences of students who did not pass the developmental math course. Why did the researcher did not use case study? Accordingly, a case study focuses on in-depth data collection among participants in their natural settings. In addition, a case study approach requires a unique event or contemporary issue to study. But on the study that we discussed, the last one, that research study did not focus on unique events. It focused on the lived experiences of the students who failed a developmental math course. The lack of standard research design in the discipline of developmental math literature lends caution to attempting a case study approach. Why did the researcher did not use ethnography? Ethnography is more on examining patterns of predictable behavior and thought from the viewpoint of a specific culture group. And the research study does not focus on culture. Why did the researcher not use grounded theory? The grounded theory methodology is more on existing theory or builds a theory from research data to examine research questions. And the study that we had does not focus on using data to build a theory. In addition, the research does not use a pre-developed theory to answer the research questions. Third, why did the researcher not use narrative inquiry? Narrative inquiry is more on describing sequential events, an individual account in the hopes of giving meaning to the narratives. The focus is more on the continuum of a participant's story. And the research that we had does not focus on people's stories through personal events or history. So I think we were able to summarize the five designs. I hope you were able to know them because our objective really is to know the fundamentals of the five designs and identify some data collection methods that can be used to them. And then I hope in the next meeting that we could talk about data analysis, how to analyze the data that we gathered. But I would like to share a little about the different research designs, because some of us are making qualitative research and then we just indicate that the study is a qualitative research, but we don't know what design we are using, and it will lessen the merit and the rigor of our research, because using the designs that we have here will make our theoretical underpinnings more precise, and the way we can interpret and answer our questions will be more credible. So we need to really go over with what design in the qualitative research are we to use based on the purpose of our study and based of our research questions. I hope you learned something from this sharing, and thank you for having me here. Good day, everyone. If you have questions, then you can ask.